Hi, I'm Ajaire Parello, a Shannon Fabrics Cuddle Ambassador. I'm here in the Cuddle studio today to talk about something very exciting. We are foundation paper piecing with the new Quilting Cuddle. And I'm really excited about all these sharp corners we get. The points are just perfect. All of the nap is going in the same direction. So let me show you all my tips for how you're going to foundation piece. First, let's talk about what we're going to need for today's project. So for foundation piecing, we are going to have a pattern. We're using this pattern that's going to be up on the Shannon Fabrics Learning Center. It's for this neat little kind of succulent-y looking print here, and then all the pages that will be associated with that, and we'll talk about how that works. We're going to be using an iron, so we are pressing. This Quilting Cuddle, it's okay to press, so we're going to take advantage of that. You're going to want some sort of, this isn't done yet, so don't worry, we want some sort of ironing board or an ironing surface for that. Those mats that are made of wool, those work great for this situation. We're going to have various size rulers during the process. Always use our by any stiletto, that's a huge help. And different marking tools. You'll see that with this project, we don't just use the felt tip marker like we do often with Cuddle. We are going to be using maybe some chalk markers. I do like to use one of the friction disappearing pens, and we'll talk more about that. We are going to be using the Odive 505 glue stick. So that's a newish product from Odive. And so instead of the spray, we're going to be using the stick because it's a little more specific to where we're putting it. We can get right and pinpoint. We're going to need some tape to put the pattern pieces together. I like to use an older rotary cutter that is sort of on its way out because I am going to be cutting through the paper for the foundation paper piecing. And when I do that, that does dull the blade a little bit, but it'll be fine. It's all going to work into the seam allowances, but I don't want to use my brand new fresh rotary blade for that. We're also going to be using later the Olfa SAC1 blade or the Karen K. Buckley micro serrated scissors. We're going to use those for sort of finishing the project, however you want to finish it, whether we've made a pillow, you could do a throw, you could do a blanket or quilt, but you will use those cutting implements for that. We always like to use the clover pins. I like these flower head pins that come in the box. They're a little bit more sturdy than some of the other flower head pins. And then you obviously pair that with a magnetic pin cushion. Don't forget your paper cutting scissors because again, you do not want to be using your beautiful Karen K. Buckley's to be cutting paper. And then in the end, we may be using some Wonder Clips to hold things together, so you want to have those on hand. As always, we're going to be using 100% polyester thread. This is a Metrocene by Metler, but you can use pretty much any 100% polyester thread. Just make sure it's a nice sturdy one. For the foundation paper piecing, we need paper. We need the pattern. So we've got this pattern and it comes in, you print it out, it comes as a letter size. So we're going to just cut these edges so we can tape it together. There's only 4 pattern pages, so it's not a lot of cutting. You use your paper scissors, friends. We're not using our nice fabric scissors for this. And then we're just going to tape them together. So you just line up the edges so they look nice and tape them along the edges. And then you would tape these two together and tape it up there like that. Line it up nice, and then I do have one already taped down here. So now this is going to be our nice big piece here. This is our foundation paper piece. And if you've ever done foundation paper piecing before, you know that you're actually putting the fabric on the back of the pattern page. So what's on the front is going to be a reverse of what the pattern looks like. So you kind of have to wrap your head around this picture. It's going to sort of be opposite on the pattern page itself. So you have all your fabrics and you know which color is going to go where, all by the numbers on here, and this is all in the pattern. So I've cut out my pieces already. This is all my Quilting Cuddle has already been cut out. But what I want to do to this pattern page first is using some sort of permanent marker, because we are going to be pressing later and it will press onto this paper as well. So you don't want to be using like a friction pen for this part, because as soon as you put the heat on there, it'll go away. So we want something permanent. And what we're going to do is we're just going to mark what direction we want our nap to go. So I want this pillow, we're going to make a pillow out of this, for this pattern, the foundation paper piece pattern, to go upright like this. So that means we want the nap to go down. We want to be heading it in this direction. If you wanted yours to look like this, then you would want the nap to go like this. So you just can decide how you want your nap to go. But for this one, we're going to want the nap to go all in the same direction. So what I'm going to do is on the front of this piece of paper, I'm going to draw an arrow pointing down. So that's my arrow down. I'm using the edge that's already a straight line there to mark that. I'm also going to do that on the back, because we are going to be flipping back and forth, and we just don't want to forget which direction our nap is going to go, because it's going to be really important as we go along to keep track, because we want all those naps facing in the same direction. Now, I will say, if you are going to be doing something like this, there is a smaller, the one we're doing now is going to end up a 12-inch square. These each are 6-inch squares that can be sewn together, and you can do lots of different things with them. So for this, you see this piece, the nap is going to go in this direction. This piece, I turned it, so you need to make sure for each of these quadrants, you know which way the nap is going to face. So on each of the pieces, you would be marking a different direction, if that makes sense. So you just sort of have to map it out before you go. But all of the pieces within each of these quadrants, that nap is going to be the same. So we're just doing that on this big piece here. But if you were using the smaller pieces, on this one, you would have it going this direction. On the next one, you'd have it going this direction. So you would just make sure on each of your 4 pattern pieces, you have that marked. Again, with something permanent, so it doesn't get changed. So now we've got that all marked out, and we're going to start off with square 1. We always start with 1, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a pin to push through to the other side to see where we want our fabric to go on the other side, because the markings are not on the other side of the fabric. And once we get started, that won't be quite as important, but at least if I make a little hole at each of those spots, we make sure that we've got our piece going the right way. So we're going to flip it to the back, and here I can see those 2 markings, so I want to make sure my first piece is going to go face up and covering those markings. And you do want to take into account the seam allowance. So I'm actually going to mark this edge here is all 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so it does give us that edge. Right here, I'm going to mark out another 1/4 of an inch, because we do want to make sure we're leaving a seam allowance around this edge so that something can grab it. And we are using a 1/4 of an inch standard quilting seam allowance for this, because the Quilting Cuddle allows for that. Okay, so our first piece, piece number 1, and I've actually marked it on the back with a little 1 there so that I can keep track of which color is which and which numbers are which. I like to cut all my stuff out first and then start doing the foundation paper piecing. You can do it as you go along, whatever works for you, but if I'm doing it first, I want to make sure I'm marking as I go. So with piece number 1, we know we want the nap to go in this direction. So this is a square, this piece is 4 by 4, so I want to make sure I find which way is the correct direction. And now I can feel that that's the nap going the wrong direction, so I want it this way, like that. And then I just double check by, if I pull this way, there's a little bit of stretch there, so I know that is the width-wise of the fabric, the width of fabric. There's no stretch on the selvage edge. So I do know that when it's all finished, I want that to be nap going down just like that. So again, on the back, I'll put an arrow, and I'm just going to put an arrow. I'm using this water erasable marker from Clover. There's lots of different ways to mark it, but you do want something that's not necessarily permanent. It's within the seam allowance, so nobody's going to see it, but I just want something that's going to make sure I know later that this piece is going to follow the nap this way. It doesn't seem as important right now because this is going the standard way we would think of the nap, but once you get into turning that pattern page around, it's going to be more important to make sure we follow it. So again, we've got our arrow pointing down, and we're going to place this face up so that it's covering those dots that I made. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that 505 glue stick and glue it right to the page in place. Now remember, the 505 stick is just like the OD spray, where it holds it in place, but it's not permanent. It will wash out. So it just does a great job of gripping everything in place for us so that we can know that that's firmly in place, and we can peel it up later if we need to. So our first piece is down and in the right spot. Now we're going to flip back over, and I'm just sort of careful with it at first because not everything is glued down, so I just want to make sure it's nice and flat. Actually, what I will do is I will just add a little bit more of this just to hold those edges nice, so we're not even worrying about it when we flip it over. Again, this will wash out, so I'm not too concerned with it, but we just want to make sure that's nicely in place for our next step. And now we're coming over to piece 2. Now piece number 2 is this really beautiful berry. So this is, again, it's all Quilting Cuddle. This is all in the Meet Me in the Garden collection. So again, I just do a kind of a little bit of a tug to make sure I know this is the widthwise direction. It looks like that's the nap in the correct, that's the nap in the opposite direction. So I flip it over. And now here, if I use this water soluble, it doesn't show up super well. So you can use something lighter. I've used the Madame So chalk mark. And because I'm not doing any fancy numbers or anything, it doesn't write super well, but it does lines really well. So you just kind of make a down arrow like that. There's also yellow, which shows up really nicely, but that's just the white. So that will wash right out. It's not permanent, but it's telling us the direction that we want the nap to go. So now this piece is going to stitch onto number 1. We are stitching on the lines. That's how you do your FBP. You're going to stitch along the lines here, and you remember you want to go the 1/4 of an inch on either side for seam allowance. And with this one, we're going to be flipping it down when we get to the other side. So we stitch them along the edge, and then we're going to flip it down. So now, in order for the naps to be going in the right direction, here, if I stitched it here and then flipped it, this arrow would then be facing in the wrong direction, so the nap would be wrong. So in order to flip something down, and it's just straight down, it's not at an angle at all, we're going to make sure our arrow is pointing up when we line it up on the back. That way when we do flip it down, that nap is going to be in the right direction. So anything that's specifically straight down or specifically straight over and no angles is pretty straightforward with how the nap's going to go. So here, what I like to do is I like to fold back on this number 2 line that we're going to be stitching on. So I'm folding it right on the stitching line, kind of all the way across. And then when I flip it over, I can see this line is where we're going to want to line things up. And with this, this is where I will use my friction pen, because these lines are just on the paper, and it's fine if we press and they disappear later. I kind of want them to go away because this is only for this specific step. This is where we want to make sure our stitching line is going to be, and so we know where to line this piece up. So I'll look at my chalk mark is pointing down here, but I know that I want to line it up with the chalk mark pointing up because we are going to flip down. So now I'm going to line this up. And what I want to do is I'm going to pin this through all the layers. I pin through the paper as well. But what I do is I just, because we're going to be stitching from the other side. So I'm just pinning in place so that I can flip it over and pin from the other side. So pin that in place, make sure everything is flat. That first piece has been has the ODF on it. So now I pin along the stitching line at first. So I'm pinning through the stitching line, right through the paper, and flip it back over. Now I can remove that first pin that we did because that was just holding everything in place. And this wasn't perfect because I was just trying to make sure I've got it. So on that stitching line, when I pull this down, are all my naps going the same direction? And the answer is yes. When I hold it up, does it cover over where that number 2 piece needs to sit? So is that piece going to cover the whole thing where number 2 is with some seam allowance allowed? And the answer is yes. So I know this piece is in the right place, and now I just want to pin it a little bit better from on top. And I do kind of just lift up and flatten things down. And I'm going to pin away from the stitching a little bit just to kind of keep the fabric where it needs to go. The Quilting Cuddle doesn't need tons and tons of pins like some of our other cuddles do. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure everything's nice and flat back there. That's the key, is making sure it's flat when you're doing this. So I'm going to undo that first one because that had been a little bit bunchy there. Smooth it out a little bit. And then I am going to put another one right on that stitching line because I will start with this pin in place and then remove it as I go. And then I just double check that the back is looking pretty straight. That one needs to be adjusted too, although that one's going to be removed by the time we're done. You just want to make sure everything's nice in back. The nicer you can make it in back, you know you're going to have a better outcome. Okay, so I think that piece is in place. It's still a little bit bunchy. There we go. I might up here stick some pins up here just to keep everything in place so it's not moving around. With some of these bigger pieces, you do want to kind of manage the fabric a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch this. So remember, we are stitching on that number 2 line. When we get it over to actually sew, you want to make sure your fabric's nice and flat underneath. You can kind of feel it under there, and you can also kind of get that in and then lift it up. Make sure everything's nice and flat. And we're going to begin to stitch. I am actually going to take our straight stitch and I'm going to, I had it at a 3.5 for Cuddle. I am going to drop it down to 3.25 and see how that goes. I like it to be a little bit smaller of a stitch just to really hold everything in place nicely. And then I use my stiletto to just sort of keep track of everything. That pin I removed, and now I'm just going to stitch right along this line. It feels funny to stitch through the paper, and you are technically dulling your needle a little bit, but that's okay. You can always replace your needle before your next project anyway, and it's worth it to be able to get those super smooth lines with the foundation paper piecing. So now again, I like to just double check. Naps are looking good. That's a nice straight line there. So now what we do is we fold back along that stitch line. So now we have the edge of the papers there, and our fabric's here, and I'm going to trim to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm lining up my mat at a 1/4 inch. And what I do is I sort of line it up on the paper and the stitching line. If you can't quite see the stitching line, that's okay. I just sort of line it up. This is going to be inside, you know, in the seam allowance. So it's not super important that it has to be exact, but you want to keep things nice and smooth, and we're going to get rid of some of the bulk. So this, again, I'm using my rotary cutter that's a little bit more dull than I normally have a rotary cutter, but it works fine for this. And then I am going to just use the vacuum really quick to get any little bit of cuddle dust off of this edge. I find that if I do that as I go along, there's almost no mess with this project. So I really like to just get rid of that cuddle dust right away. All right, so now we want this piece to flip down there. So this is where I'm going to use the 505 glue stick again. I'm just going to put some on here where I want it to go, and then I'm going to pull it down, and I do just give it a little bit of a tug to make sure it's nicely in place, and then I'm going to press it. So I'm using a relatively low setting on my iron. This is the Aliso little mini iron, and it's probably at like a wool silk setting, and you want to use a pressing cloth, and I just put it over, and I'm really just going to press that in place. I'm pressing that seam allowance down, but I'm also pressing so that that glue stick sort of adheres a little bit. Again, it's not going to be permanent. I can still remove it, but I'm just pressing it down. I am sort of moving it. You don't technically tug this too much because just like with cotton, you could distort it, but I like to just kind of give that a little press like that. Because it's such a low setting, I feel like that helps to set it in. And then also what I'm doing is getting rid of those friction lines on the paper, so my paper's not a scattered nightmare by the time I'm done of just weird lines I've pressed. So now we have that piece now locked in place as well. So when we flip this back over, that piece is going to stay pretty steady. So it's going to help keep everything keep track of everything. So now we have pieces 1 and 2 done. The next one we're going to do is 3. That's this pretty floral. And once again, we're just going to find our nap. Normally when I cut out the pieces, I will mark these naps at the same time that I mark the numbers, but I didn't do that this time because I wanted to sort of show you what I do. So the nap is definitely going in that direction, so I'm going to put an arrow down. This color shows up great, so I'm going to use this one here for down. This one's another really straightforward one. 3 is going to be stitched like this and then flip directly to the left, or really on the other side will be directly to the right. So because of that, the arrows going the same way, it's still going to be going in the same direction. So you're just flipping it over vertically, so it's not complicated with this one at all. So all I'm going to be doing is taking my page, and again, I'm folding on that number 3 line, and what I do is I like to kind of temporary press there and temporary press on the other end of the line. Then naturally the page wants to just go in the right way. I'm not taking the time to mark it out and everything. This does not have to be exact. This just helps us line everything up. So again, this line and this line are what I'm looking at now. And I'm going to mark with my friction pen that line. And you can see the marks from before, from the other one, are gone. So there's still a fold there, still a crease, but I know when I come back here that that crease, this is the crease I'm looking for, is the one that's actually drawn. This permanent one has stayed there. All right, so my arrow's facing down, so I know we want to line this up and down, nicely in line with those. Now, on the back of the Quilting Cuddle, you can see a kind of a grid because it is knit fabric. So because of that, there's sort of you almost see little tiny lines in there, and especially once you get familiar with it, you really notice it. So you can see very well what direction everything's lining up. So this is going to be just right here. And now, like we did before, I'm going to start down here at the line, on the stitching line. I'm just going to put a pin. These do not have to be exact. I'm just trying to double check my work. If you notice, I do a lot of double checking. The worst thing is to get too far ahead and realize something isn't working. So I like to just double check as I go along. So when I do this, now that's the stitching line. I'm going to flip over, and now are all my pieces having the nap in the same direction? And they do. The other thing I'm checking is when I flip over, does that piece cover where I need it to cover? And it does. So you just are checking, are you going to be, because this down here, this is the stitching line, but also the fabric needs to hit down here. So you need that piece to be big enough to cover that whole area. Now when I flip it across and I hold it up to the light, is that going to cover my whole 3 piece? And it will. So you just kind of hold it up to the light and see. Now that we know it's right, now we can flip this over and pin it in place nicely from this direction. So again, we're putting pins on each side of the seam so that we're not, we don't have to remove the pins as we go necessarily. And then, just to sort of hold everything in place. We don't need tons and tons of pins, but we do need some. And I'm putting some over here to hold that fabric in place. And when we flip it over and I take these two out, I will probably add over to here and over to here just to make sure I don't want those corners to come in as I'm stitching and do anything crazy there. So I'll put one more pin on this stitching line itself so I can start it out. I like to do that as I start out. And then just double check the back, nothing weird's happening. And then come back here and we're going to start stitching on that number 3 stitching line. And I do like to start just a little bit away from the 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I just know for sure that it's all going to clear. And I stitch past just even a little bit further than I need to. And I clip my stitches. And then we'll remove the pins. We're also removing these pins. Now that looks nice to me. Just once again, hold it up and double check. Yep, everything looks good. So again, we will take our Odif, put some on there. You could see that if we were using the 505 spray, that we'd have to be doing a lot of, protecting to not overspray. So that's what I like about the glue stick for this purpose, is it really does give us the ability to put everything exactly where we want it. And once again, I'm going to press this down. I like to press each step. I think it really makes a difference in the final product to have everything nice and crisp. Mostly just pressing the seam allowance, but again, I do like to kind of hit those friction pen marks. If you have a tailor's clapper, you can kind of put it on there because this isn't super high heat, so it is nice to put the tailor, like I can put my hand here, it's not that hot. So it is nice to put the tailor clapper on there for like another 30 seconds just to get a super crisp line, but it's totally fine if you don't. This is also a thicker pressing cloth, so I'm going to up the heat just a little bit just because it's not, like even the friction lines aren't totally going away. So it's a really low iron. But that's okay, we don't want the iron too hot because we don't want to ruin the fabric. All right, so now we're moving on to number 4. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, is because 4 is a diagonal line. So we're going to be stitching on a diagonal. And it's not exactly a 45 degree, and it doesn't matter what the degree is. It does not matter what this angle is. We have a trick to actually make it work no matter what. So I'm going to find my number 4 piece. This is my number 4 piece. And I know it wants to go like this to cover. So let me figure out which way the nap is going to go. It's definitely going down in that direction. So I'm going to put an arrow down for where the nap is. So we know that this nap is going down. So what we're doing now is we're trying to figure out how we're going to stitch it here on this line and then flip it down. But it's not exactly down, it's to an angle. So because we're flipping down, we want to make sure that the bulk of the fabric that we're lining up here, what we're wanting to flip, the amount that we want to fill this 4 space is going to be below the line that we're about to draw. And you'll see what I mean as we go along, but I think when we're flipping down, the lower part is where we want the extra fabric. So I'm lining this arrow where the nap is along with this arrow, and then what I'm going to do is I'm right along this line, which is that number 4 stitching line. I'm going to line up this pattern piece so that I can make a line right on the fabric that's the same angle. So I'm going to draw right on here that line that's the same angle. So I'm going to use, this is a nice light color, white color, so I can just do that, and I make a line there. So you see what I mean by most of this piece of fabric, is below this line versus above this line. This is a smaller triangle, this is the bigger triangle. So later when we flip it down, we want the bigger spot to land there. Now, I'm going to fold this back just like we've done with the other ones. A little bit more space. So this is at an angle. We're going to take this number 4 line. Remember I said I kind of just gently find that end and then gently find that end. Then I can press it harder so we're getting that correct angle. On the back here we can see that's the line, that's the angle, so that's where we're putting our markings. So as you can see, the further that we're going along, the more these are going to matter because we're not just flipping an easy 90 degrees. That was from before and I didn't quite hit it with the iron, so we're going to ignore that one. Now, again, this arrow is going down, so the nap when we're done is going to want to be in this direction. And in order for that to happen, the arrow that we put on this is going to need to point toward the top of the piece. So I line this blue line up with this fold. It does not have to be exactly perfect. We're just doing our best to get it into place. What I'm going to do is on the stitching line, just like we've done before, it becomes more important now because we're checking more things. But I am going to put a pin at the beginning of where that fabric is and at the end so I can see where it starts and stops and see if I need to slide this way or this way. Because again, remember that bulk of the fabric is here, and again, it was on the other side, it was below the line. At this point now that is above, but we're going to flip it down. So now I test it out and we flip it down, and that is going in the exact right direction. So that nap is directly up and down. And depending on how you put your pins, it may not be exact until you actually stitch it, but that we know that's good. So we know we've at least placed it correctly, but let's check from the other side. Do we have enough facing? So here is where my fabric is starting at that number 4. And it does start about ½ an inch more. So I might want to add a little bit more there. Here, I'm noticing that there. What we're going to do for this one, and I'm just going to show you this because you may encounter the same thing. When we fold this down, we see that we've got plenty extra folded down below where the 4 mark is there. So I am just going to draw a mark parallel to that blue mark we already made. I basically compensated too much on the other side. So we're going to give ourselves a little more real estate and add this back in. So this is now the new line that we're going to use to line everything up. Hopefully this is making sense. It's a little trick that you can use that doesn't rely on it having to be exact for every single pattern that you do with foundation paper piecing. You can make it work for what you're doing. So I like that it's not specific and you just kind of have to feel it out a little bit, but it does make it relatively easy to keep the naps going in the right direction. So now when I pull this down, I'm going to look from the other side, and I think I still have more than enough. Yeah, I still have plenty to fill that 4 space, but as you can see, I now see where that pin is. It's outside of that 1/4 inch, and it covers that too, and it does stick out past that too. So it's right about here. So we've got plenty of seam allowance there to do the stitching. So now I'm going to try to make sure this is in place as I flip. Nothing's bunchy. And now I'm going to pin everything in place. All right, feel it out. Once again, just sort of pinning on either side of this line through all the layers. It can be a little bit tricky to pin through the paper, through the layers. So this is where these sturdier clover flower head pins come in. The boxed ones especially are a little bit thicker. That does help. And I'm going to just pin over here to make sure this flap doesn't come undone. And pin over here to make sure that flap doesn't get in the way. These are things that could flip over before we start to stitch and get in our way. We don't want that to happen. We want everything to be nice and flat. And then pin right along the stitching line. And on this one, because it's a relatively long line, I am going to pin once more back here just to sort of hopefully hold everything in place. Just look at it. There we go. And now we're going to come back and just the same as we've done before, stitch right along that line, starting outside of where the seam allowance is. I like to just give myself plenty of room. And then get rid of my pins as we go. And you're just stitching right along the line. Sorry about that. I like to just double check nothing is caught under there and it's not. With the bigger pattern page like this, some of that will flip up. So just be aware nothing is getting in your way. And clip the stitches. Okay, so let's see how this did. Okay. Oh, see? Right there, that little flap came down. And that was right in the beginning. So let me take my little seam ripper. I am going to take the time to rip it. Now, the nice thing about this quilting cuddle is the stitches aren't totally lost in it like it is with some of the luxes. So you can actually see your stitches, and it is relatively easy to get those out of there. So I'm just going to rip those stitches up and just redo that little spot because I don't want that to be coming undone there, to be flipping down. It's that one there. I almost undid the wrong one. All right, let's see here. Get those stitches out of there. Okay, so I'm just going to pin that down again nicely. On the other side. Before I do that, let's just pull this down, make sure everything's going to cover pretty well, so I'm not having to do this twice. So I do see that slid just a little bit. All right, yep, we're good. All right. Sorry. With the bigger pieces, things flop around a little bit. You just got to make sure everything is nice and secure. The good thing is that glue is holding everything in place that we've previously done. So all the other fabric isn't flapping around back there. So these pieces aren't flapping around too, because if we weren't using that Odif, all these pieces would be getting in the way. Right now, all we're worried about is this piece that we're currently doing. So we just got to kind of control that a little bit. We always say control is the name of the game. You are in control of the fabric. You got to tell it what to do. Press our foot in the right spot. Foot pedal. There we go. I'm just going to stitch along there. I don't have to go the whole way down again, so I am just going to cut it there. Oh, and now I got that end caught because I was just going to do up to there, but that's okay. I can just remove those. This is the real life sewing, guys. There we go. There we go. So now we've got it nicely stitched on there. And you can see that I was off a bit here, but that's okay because as long as you've got the angle right, the naps are still in the same way. So it didn't have to be exactly on these lines that we did. We're just getting that angle correct, and so we're giving us a guideline. So it's still parallel to this one. That one I went off a little bit there, but it's still fine. But you've got everything going in the same direction. So now what we're going to do is we need to trim this seam allowance here. So first we're going to, just clip that, pull this up. Now remember, we glued that down to the paper. So we're just pulling it up to reveal that seam that line that we just stitched. So we're lifting that up, and now we're going to flip this fabric backwards on over to reveal that stitching. So we're pulling the paper backwards, so the opposite way we did it before. This is all seam allowance that we now want to cut off. We want to get rid of that so it's not bulky underneath. So the same way we did before, we're going to line up your ruler for 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm lining up the paper, and then I kind of am just double checking that I've got the stitching in there. You want to make sure there's nothing in here that you don't want to cut off. So all of this is okay to cut off. Go through all those layers, scoop that away, and then again, I'm just going to use the vacuum really quick so we don't have any mess. Cool. And then, as you can see, everything is going to flip down really nicely. And now we're just going to put our ODF on this piece, flip it down into place, and we'll press. Put this on here. All right. We'll just press this in place. I'm going to try to get rid of the friction lines this time. There we go, that's gone. Just know that it's a little bit warmer. Get rid of those lines. There we go. Okay. So now when I hold it up, I look and I see number 4, it covers it all, and there's just enough for a seam allowance as well. So we did great with number 4. Now we're going to move on to number 5. That's another dot. That's our number 9. Here's our number 5. And let's figure out which direction the nap goes. Yep, it's very clear. It's going down this way. And again, you can always take the top edge, and yep, that's the stretchy edge, so we know that we've got that right. Sometimes with the lower piles, it can be trickier to figure out which way the nap is actually going. It's pretty clear, but your brain can play tricks on you. So that's another way to check to make sure you've got it the right way. So again, with 5, this is an angle. And this time we're going to be flipping up. So we're going to be stitching it down like this and then flipping it up. So for this one, we're on this side of the page, we're going to have our arrow going down, just like this arrow is going down. And then we're going to line it up because we want this stitching line to be put on this pattern. On this piece of fabric. So because we're going to be flipping it up, we want the bulk of this fabric piece to be on the top. So we want that to be able to cover. So it feels opposite because you feel like you want the bulk to be down here because you're flipping that up. But once you get to the back, it's sort of the opposite. So just trust me, if you're flipping up, you want the top part to be what covers. So we're lining this up. And what I do is I just make sure the arrow edge is nice and parallel to the edge and to where this arrow is pointing. And then I'm going to find my ruler and I just line it up. See how I'm lining it up on just a portion of that line? And then just slide this around till I can get, remember last time when we did number 4, we didn't have quite long enough line. I had done I compensated a little bit too much. So now I want to make sure I've got a nice long line, but we want to make sure the angle's right. So we're just kind of moving this around till I get it right. There we go. And so what I'm going to do here is I will do it in 2 parts. I'm going to line this up nicely there. And then I'm going to mark here. And then I am going to slide it down and just mark more on my fabric. You could also use a longer ruler. If you had a longer ruler, you wouldn't have to mark twice, just to get that there. And then I'm going to kind of pull it up here and just double check that that feels long enough, that that line feels long enough to cover that whole spot, and it does. So now we flip to the back. First, we're going to fold back on that number 5 line. So here's our point, here's our point. Just kind of fold it down. We'll mark with this friction pen where we want things to line up. And now, this is the way we want our nap. And when we place this, we're going to want the arrow to be facing toward the bottom, and this bulk of the fabric that we're going to flip up to be below, because we're stitching and flipping up, if you remember. So now I'm going to put everything in place. I'm going to try to line up, and it can be tricky to line up this with that line down there because this fabric does want to move around a little bit, so it does kind of shift a little bit since you're not putting the 2 pieces. When you put the 2 pieces together this way, everything's nice and smooth, but when you start to twist the way the naps go, it wants to shift more. So because this is at an angle, it's wanting to shift a little bit more. So you're just going to do more pins really once you start getting to the angles versus doing directly a 90-degree perpendicular or parallel. So I'm going to pin these in place. Again, I'm just trying to check if my line is within, so I need a little bit further there, and I've got just plenty there, so let me just check what I have here. So I do have that extra there, and I have extra there, so I've got it in the right spot. My blue line is long enough for stitching the whole way. Now I want to check that when I do flip it up, did I do it right and my nap is going in the correct direction? And it is. If it wasn't, this is when you would flip it around and do it the other way. So that looks great. Now what I want to do is I'm going to be pinning from the other side, but this time I am going to just kind of pin all this down and out of the way now so I know nothing's going to get in our way. These bigger pieces really do want to flop around, so I'm just not going to mess around with it this time, and we'll just get that nicely locked in place. So we flip it over. I'm going to be stitching from here this way, so now I'm going to put my pins in. So we're using a few more pins, but as you saw with the last one, I didn't use that many pins, and then I had to do some seam ripping. So just take your time, add the extra pins if necessary. You get to decide. Okay. So that still looks smooth. Now I am going to just move this one completely out of the way, but it's still holding that down. This one needs to be moved. That one needs to be moved. And then this one's still plenty out of the way, but I am just going to move this one over a little bit too. That one's plenty out of the way too. They might catch on the bottom plate, so I do like to just make sure those are totally out of the way. Now I'm going to put a pin here for when we start. Hopefully that'll help keep that from flipping up like it did last time. That's the goal. And the same with that one on that end. So there we go. We're nice and flat. Let's start stitching. And again, let's just make sure that right there is not going to flip up as we start. And every machine's a little bit different. Yours might want to make it happen. Other ones might not. It really depends on whether or not your stitch is trying to do a knot when it first starts or what. This one does. This one likes to kind of almost back stitch itself, which is nice because it secures that stitch. So it can want to accidentally flip that fabric up if you're not being super careful. We're going to remove the pins as we go. Let me just go beyond and clip. Now we get to remove all these pins. And once again, let's just test it out. Oh, we're starting to get a nice looking flower there. Look at those crisp seams there. That's really nice in there. All right, so everything looks good. So once again, now we're going to, this is the seam allowance, this part we're going to rip up. And you're not ripping the paper, you're just pulling that 505 away from the paper. And where you've stitched a little bit past, sometimes you have to just kind of like pull that. You're not pulling out the stitches, you're pulling the paper off of those stitches. You're just trying to reveal this seam allowance. So fold the paper back on itself along that stitching line. The other thing we're doing by doing that is we're getting that paper ready to be removed later. The more you fold it, the more the paper is going to be ready to just remove easy later, kind of perforating it almost. So I don't mind folding it so many times. It may seem like, you know, it's a lot of extra work or something to do all this folding and folding and folding and pinning, but it's going to give us just such beautiful results that to me it's totally worth it. So with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm just trimming off all this bulk. We'll vacuum again. Okay, and then I can put the 505 right on there, flip it up. That was actually a lot of 505. Don't need to put quite that much on there, but let's get it to really stick in place. If you don't like where it went, you can do it again. That's the nice thing about that 505 glue stick and spray is you can move it around. Same thing we've been doing, we're just going to press. I'm pressing the whole piece and not just the seam because I do want that 505 to kind of dry in there. Again, trying to get rid of the friction marks, those erasable pen marks. There we go. All right, so that's coming along really nicely. You can see the first part is all coming along. Pattern page again. We're going to start doing those ones there. So just want you guys to see a few of the colors as we go along. So now this is going to be, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we're going to do number 6. So let me find pattern piece number 6. Yep, that's this one. So this is another straight up and down line. So all we're going to be doing is flipping this one over vertically. So it's not a super complicated one. We know the nap's going that direction, so I'm going to mark the nap. Nap is going down. So I'm not even going to mark on this one because it is just a straight line. So what we do, we still make the fold because that'll tell us where we need to line things up with our seam allowances. And as we're going along, you'll see there is quite a bit that we can cut off here, but with these diagonal strips, I like to have extra there because it can get complicated, as you see, with how much fabric we need to actually get that to fold over all the way. So I like to have this extra. So that's why even in these simple ones, I like to mark where to put this piece because the arrow's going down, so we know that it's going to go like that. But now I can see I only want to be about 1/4 of an inch away from there for the seam allowance. I don't need to go all the way over here because then I'd be stitching here and I wouldn't have enough room. So I can see about where I need to have this and I can see exactly how I want to line it up just parallel. So just as I normally do, I'm going to try to put a pin right about where the stitching line is. And up here too, make them nice and everything to be nice and parallel. Flip this over. Yes, my seam allowance, I mean, the rest of the naps are going the same way, and yes, this has plenty of fabric to cover that number 9 piece. You want to just hold it up to the light and check. So I'm going to see that it has plenty of seam allowance there. I'm going to shift it down just slightly because I want to make sure I have enough seam allowance on this edge here. I do think it can use a little bit more here. So I'm just going to shift it down one. And this is why we do it this way. We want to just double check. And I'm not worried right now that this is exactly a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There is room in these pieces that you can make it almost a 1/2 inch here, and we're going to trim it to a 1/4 inch. So we don't have the bulk of a 1/2 inch that's going to get stuck in there later, but this way we've got room to pin it on either side of that, the stitching line. And if we did a 1/4 inch here, it would be harder to pin. So I like to do it that way ahead of time so that I know I have room here I can pin. I can pin it here and still hit the fabric. But I'm outside of where that seam allowance was. If it was only a 1/4 inch, I'd be hitting here and the flower head might get stuck under the needle. So that's another thing to note, is that with these pieces, you don't have to make an exact 1/4 inch seam allowance as you're going along. We will trim that later. Right. I'm going to remove these two. I'll put them here. Keep everything nice. You want to make sure that doesn't get. Yep, good to go. How's that look? Oops. See, now that bunched there, so we want to make sure. Yep, now we're good. Okay, so let's stitch this one. And removing the ones that are right on the stitch line. Kind of feel, make sure everything's lining up nicely. It's kind of fun to stitch on these lines. We don't get to do this very often. And so it is kind of fun to stitch right over the paper. You kind of feel like you're getting away with something. And again, we just change our needle out for the next project, which we're supposed to be changing our needles out pretty often anyway, right? That's just a good excuse to have to do it. So as you can see, we do end up with almost a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but again, we will trim that down. So we'll flip it over. The nap is going in the right direction. Do I have enough to cover the whole number 9 piece as you hold it up to the light? And I do. So now we pull this up. Remember, we're just kind of pulling back to that stitch line. And we'll fold the paper back again to the stitch line. And you can see it's starting to kind of pull up here, the paper, and that's totally fine. We don't need that spot anymore really, because we've already stitched all of that in place. And if it starts to pull up, that all the better, because we are going to take the paper out in the end. Here is where we'll trim to 1/4 inch, and this just gets I like to use the vacuum as we go here because I don't want any nap to end up in the machine, and this is just one way to make sure it's always going to just be taken care of right then, and I don't have to think about it again. Because as you know, that is not going to, a little bit of that 505 got on that piece. Let me just scrape that up now before it becomes a problem. So just be careful as you're putting it on that you don't go crazy with it like I just did. But as you know, the 505 will wash out. I just don't like to then press on it if it's on the top, because I'm afraid somehow it's going to match with the nap and do something weird on the front side. I don't worry about it on the back because I've tested that so many times washing it out. But if it's on the front, I don't want to press it. That's why I just kind of scraped it out there. It was only a tiny bit, but you don't want anything happening to this piece. So now we press that in place. And again, if I had my tailor's press, tailor's clapper, I would just put that on there for a little bit longer to make it even more crisp, but it's fine. It doesn't have to happen. So now we've got our pieces done. We just did 6. Now we're going to do 7, which is this one here. So we fold back. And it does start to get a little bulky where these seams all come together, but it ends up lying really nice and flat in the end. And imagine if those were 1/2-inch seams in there, how much more bulk there would be. So it works out pretty well. All right, so now we'll find our number 7 piece. And number 7 is a nice one too, because that's just going to flip directly down. So again, it's another one of those easy ones. So that's the right direction, like that. So we'll mark this one. Pointing down. And we're not going to make a line on this piece because again, it is just really straightforward. So when we're done with this, we're going to want to flip it down so we make sure the nap's going to go this way. When we're sewing it, the nap arrow is pointing this way because when we flip it down, it'll point that way. So we'll line this up. And we'll get it nicely in place. I'm just going to pin on the line. Line. Flip it down. And then our number 7 piece is well covered by this. And plenty on that end. And plenty on that end. Okay, so we're in a good spot here. So I'm going to just put these pins up here again. Remember, I'm just holding these flaps down. If you have much smaller pieces, you don't need to go to these lengths, but it is, as you saw, it was nice to have those pins in place so nothing is wanting to be floppy on this. Make sure everything's lying nice and flat. And I'm going to want to come at it from this direction. So make sure my pins are all in place. Quite a bit of pinning, but again, pin now to make your life easier later. That way we get the best results. I will take these stitching line ones out so we can put them going in the right way. This one here. I'm just going to flatten that one out just a little bit. And then one in here. Let's just look and see. Yep, that's not too bad. I think that's going to be good. So let's get this line nicely stitched. Okay. Here we're going over a bulky part. You could use your stiletto to make sure it goes over, but I find with the paper that you don't really even need the stiletto because the paper is sort of holding everything in place solidly. And you can see that's because all these points are coming together right here. So there are a few points where that's the case. This is the major one right here, but it just gives a little bit of extra bulk, but it ends up fine in the end. Okay, so all the naps are going in the right direction. We hold it up to the light and make sure number 7 is totally covered, and it is. So again, we're just going to flip this part up and pull it back to the stitching. Go. And now we're just going to trim right off. So we have that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And with that one bulky seam in there, you kind of have to hold it in place for a second before you get your 1/4 inch lined up. You just want to make sure you're not cutting through the actual fabric. You're just cutting through the fabric on the edges that want to be in the seam allowance. So you just take care to make sure of that. Now we'll just, feels so nice when all those are in the right direction. It really just does feel so good petting this fabric all day. So, got a little bit there again. Going a little slap happy with the 505 today. So right there, it's a little bit bunchy. It's outside of where we are going to trim later, so I'm not worried about it, but that is someplace that I might have gone back and actually redid that little portion. But the good news is it's all what bothers you, and so if it's not bothering you, don't worry about it because nobody's going to notice it in the end. Now we'll just do these last 2 angles here, and then we'll show you the finished one, because I do want to show just another time doing those angles. So now we're on to number 8, which is this line here, and again, that's at an angle. And it's not the exact same angle as these. They're not all the exact same angles because it's just a really neat foundation paper piece design. That's the nice thing about foundation paper piecing, is it doesn't have to be exact angles all the time. So this is my number 8 piece. It's going to want to go like this. So let me find which way the nap is going to be. Going like this. Nap is going down. And now we're going to stitch and then flip it down onto number 8. So again, we want the bulk of this piece to be on below the line that we're going to draw on here. So we're lining up the pattern piece with the arrow pointing in the same direction as the nap. Now we're going to mark on our piece of fabric. That's our stitching line. We're sort of check and see, is the line going to be long enough? It's going to be cutting it a little bit close there, so I am just going to, if I do it a little bit further away, I think we have a little more real estate on the actual line length. So let's see how that works. We get to the other side. So we're going to fold this number 8 down, crease it along the line, mark in the crease. Now again, when this piece is done, we want the arrow to be facing down. So we want it aiming up at this point. So I can't remember where 8 ends. It ends, 8 ends this way, so it's not all the way to this edge. So that's why I do just sort of put my pins in first. And try to see if I've got the coverage correct. So when I pull this down, yep, that's going in the right direction. So let's check the pins from the other side. So I do need to slide it up this way because I'm not all the way to that seam allowance, but I have plenty on this side. So let's slide that up. This is why we do this, is we just want to make sure we've got, that we don't end up outside the seam allowance for some reason. Okay. So like that, we got enough there. Yep. I think we've got enough on either end. So now I'm going to pin this edge here so it doesn't flop down. And I'm going to pin this one too. Just get it out of the way. Pin this one down here. And then I'll flip it over. I'm actually going to pin this one more time. Now I'll flip it over and actually pin from the correct side. Just want to make sure that's starting to flip over. There we go. So we'll do these last two here just so you can see these angles. I think it's important to do it a couple of times so that you know what you're doing when it's time for you to do it. It's just a little trick to get things to have their naps going all the same direction, which is what we want in the end. Remove these seam ones. And I am going to put another one out here. So that just all keeps wanting to flop down. Put one here. So that one's flipped down too. All right. And just one more on the seam allowance here. I mean on the actual seam line. Okay. Make sure. All right, stitch this one up. All right, now let's see how we did. All right, so that seam allowance is all going nicely there. Did we, oh, we got there. And we made it there. So it's in the right spot. Will it cover the whole, it covers all of number 8. So now I'm going to pull this back again. This is all going to be trimmed off. Back along where we just stitched. And even this part down below there, that's going to get that 1/4 inch cut too, even though this piece didn't get sewn along that. That's going to get stitched later, but the way it's arranged, it's okay to cut that extra off now. It's just less that's going to be stuck in there later. All right, we'll vacuum. And then we'll do just the one more piece. Okay. See if I can do the 505 without going crazy this time. Just with these bigger pieces, I like to get it to the edge almost so that it holds that edge down nicely so that it's not flopping inside. And then we don't have to worry about it again. As you can see, you're starting to get that nice, those points there from that edge of the leaves. And now we're doing number 9, which is another angle. So, got our lines there. So this is our number 9 piece. Let's figure out the nap. It's going that way. So now, because it's at an angle, we're going to draw the line on it, and we're going to flip it up. So we want the bulk of it to be above. And we're just going to line it up so that we have the same angle. Put over a little bit. Let's see if that's enough there. So you can see there's more on this part than there is on this part. And that looks like it's going to be enough to cover there. I'm kind of just looking, does it go to here, which is that 1/4 inch, and then does it go to here? I'm just looking on either side to just be about 1/4 inch, a little more than 1/4 inch I like, so that I know I don't have to worry about it. Now we're coming back here. Remember, this is our crease. That's what we're aiming for. Our nap is going down here. When we're done, we want it to go down here after we've flipped it up. So that means we want that pointing toward the lower quadrant so that when we flip it up, the nap is going down. So this part here that we wanted the bulk above is going to be the part that flips up. So now we're just trying to aim. I like to kind of check where on the back I'm aiming for. I've got the lines here that I'm aiming for with my eyes, but I also wanted to see how far I have to shift it up, because that ends up being quite important too. Just rearrange that line, goes to that crease. Let's check it. So that looks good there. That looks good there. I think we're in a good position here. And when we flip this, the naps are going the right direction. So I'm going to put a pin up here to hold that in place. Pin up here. We've done this before. You guys should be familiar with all of this part now. So let's just get this pinned fully in place so that we can move on to showing you the final one. Just wanted you guys to see plenty of those diagonals. I feel like the ones where it flips directly up or directly to the side, those are pretty straightforward. It's these angles that can be tricky, and the key is that it does not matter what the angle is. You don't need to measure the angle. You don't need to look at lines on your ruler and line up the lines. You're really just working with these folds that we're putting in the paper and using that to help us know exactly where to go. So it just gives us a little bit more freedom. We're not pinned down, pardon the pun, to specific angles the way we might be with some other projects. All right, I think we're in place for that. Make sure that doesn't pull up. And once again, if the paper has gotten big over here and it's kind of feels like it's impeding you, you could always just fold it up a little bit if you wanted to. Just want you to try to get as straight as you can, keeping everything nice and smooth. All right. So again, we'll fold it back. Beautiful. Everything looks nice. Let's check, make sure our piece is going to fully cover that number 9 piece. And it does. If you hold it up to the light. And remember, if it didn't, you can unpick this and shift it around a little bit. That's why we're checking it. There is room for forgiveness here. You do have time to redo things if you need to. All right. So now we're just going to lop off for that the 1/4 inch seam allowance there. And it is nice having the Quilting Cuddle because we can use those 1/4 inch seam allowances again now. It really does pull the bulk down. So things that are pieced now aren't as heavy, aren't as bulky as they used to be. Those seams can really be pressed down nicely. All right, so let's put 505 in there. Get that locked into place. Go, we'll press it. Beautiful. All right, so now see how this is coming along? Look how beautiful that is. We've got these really sharp points and everything's sitting so nicely. The naps are all going the same direction, which if you saw this initially, you might think, oh, how am I going to keep all the naps the same way? It's pretty complicated. There's a lot of different angles. And as you can see, with just these few steps, we can keep everything going really nicely the same way. Okay, so now I've done all of our pieces. 16 and 17 were the last ones to do. You can see it, lots of little pin pricks and stuff on the paper, but again, each time we're folding it, we're making perforations in it, so it's going to make it easier to take out that paper later. But for now, I'm going to just give one final press. I like to do one more press down to make sure everything, that 505 glue stick is doing its job and everything's held nicely in place. And I'll still use my pressing cloth. I have pressed on Quilting Cuddle without a pressing cloth, and it's been okay. I just get nervous pressing from the front with any cuddle that it might, something might happen to the nap or something. So when I've gotten this far into a project, I don't like to press too much from the top. Also, this paper is helping to stabilize it. So as I'm kind of like pushing against this, you would think I'd be pulling it with the stretch, but it's really not going anywhere. It's just making sure those seams are getting nice and flat. So it's not doing any damage to it. If I didn't have the paper on the back, you wouldn't want to be pulling like this because it might actually affect that stretch because the Quilting Cuddle will stretch a tiny bit. Okay, so now I'm going to put my iron away because we don't need this anymore. All right, so now what we're going to do is I am going to cut along these outside lines. Now remember, this is a seam allowance here, so it's specifically designed to have that 1/4 inch seam allowance just baked right in. So I'm going to use my ruler, put it along those 1/4 inch lines, and I'm just going to cut off through all the layers. I'm going to do each of these sides, going all the way around, cutting at the 1/4 inch. And then this way we'll have, this is a 12-inch square size, so we'll have a 12.5 inch square when we're done, that's with the seam allowances. So that way you can use this in any place where you would want a 12-inch square. You could use this in a quilt, you could use it in a throw pillow. Well, we're going to do a pillow today, but you could use it in just inside a throw. You can put it in the design anywhere you want. So you can see you've got a really nice edge is a little floppy here. So I am going to add a little more 505. I want this to stick to that paper for now still because we're going to use this paper to kind of help stabilize it for the next steps. We are going to take it out of the finished product because we want this to be able to be washable, and the Quilting Cuddle is stable enough on its own once the pillow is made that you don't need the paper in there. But I want to keep it in as long as possible because then we're going to avoid any stretching. So this way, if I've got that 505, really tacking everything down, we should be good to go. Let me just vacuum up these edges that I just trimmed. Okay, now you can see here with this particular piece, it didn't make it all the way to the edge there, and that's because I accidentally cut this piece a little bit shorter than I had put in my pattern. So the nice thing about having the paper still attached to it is we will stitch right on this green line here. So I know it will catch it and it's not going to get left off, and it won't be pulling. It'll just have a much smaller seam allowance. It won't have the 1/4 inch, it'll have an eighth of an inch. But I've also found that because there's no unraveling, there's no issues with that knit edge, that if the seam allowance is even under a 1/4 of an inch, there's no problem with it pulling through or the stitches popping. So I'm not too concerned about this, but just, I think on camera you can probably see that, so I wanted to point that out. All of our little points here are meeting exactly at that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So again, that's going to make it really nice to know that we can stitch right on this line, and then we're going to catch those perfect points. So I like to keep that paper in place for the next steps. I'm going to put this to the side, and then I'm going to cut out some hide. I've got this hide in the really pretty juniper color, and you can see this juniper color here of the Quilting Cuddle goes great with the juniper of the hide. One thing to note about the Quilting Cuddle colors, if we have a color in Quilting Cuddle that has the same name as one of our existing colors in either C3 or hide or any of the other cuddles we have, they're pretty well color matched, so you can be sure that those will go together. So if it's a new color, some of our solids have a new color name, and that means there's not something yet in a C3 or a hide that's going to match it perfectly, but that really helps when matching to know this is called juniper, so we know it's going to go with the hide juniper. And I think this pillow is going to look really, really lovely in this juniper. So this is a 12-inch block, and our pillow forms are 18 inches. So that means I'm going to need to have, let's see, so 12 plus 8, 6 more inches all the way around. So that means 3 inches here, 3 inches here, 3 inches here, and 3 inches here. But we need to add seam allowances because we're going to have the seam allowances. So we will need, so for 3 inches, we'll do 3 1/4. Oh, in our pillows, we do add exactly 18 inches, and then we take the seam allowance off of that. So we're not worried about that. So I'm just trying to make this piece for the front 18 inches. So from 12.5, which is what it is now, that seam allowance on either side is a 1/4 of an inch. So that'll make it 12. And then, so we really just need a 3 1/4 inch cuts all the way around. What I like to do is with the hide, this is a Luxe Cuddle. So we'll talk about Luxe Cuddle just a little bit. We do still mark on the back. We're going to use our blade for that because it is a higher pile. Luxe starts at 10 millimeters. So depending on which Luxe you have, you could have different heights of pile. But this one here is 10 millimeters. So you kind of figure out which way is the right way and which is the wrong way. This feels like hide kind of swirls around a little bit, so it can be tricky to find. If you can't tell which way the nap is going, then it doesn't really matter. But I think the nap is going that way, so I'm just going to mark on the back that it's going that way, just so I can remember an arrow pointing the direction of the nap. Because what I'm going to do is, remember, we've taken the time to make sure that all of these have a nice nap going in the same direction. So we want the nap of the border of this to go the same direction as well. So I'm not going to just rush through it when we've taken the time to do this piece so nicely. So I am going to cut, what did I say, 3 1/4. So we need, for this top edge, we're going to need, right now it is 12.5 inches. So we need 3 1/4 by 12.5. And that's going to go along the width of the fabric because that's sort of the width there. So I'm going to go 12, what did I say, 12.5 by 3 1/4. So I'm just going to line my ruler up on the edge here, 3 1/4. And I'm going to mark that off for you guys now so you can see exactly what I'm doing. 3 1/4, not half, 12.5 by 3 1/4. And with the hide, you can see that I don't need to cut off this selvage edge. That hide looks really nice all the way to the edge and has a nice hang off there. So I don't bother to trim off the edge, the selvages. With some cuddles, like C3 has a bit of, you can see from the front where that selvage is. So typically with C3, unless it's completely going to hide in the seam allowance, you'll want to take that off. But with hide, even if this wasn't going into a seam allowance, I could still use that edge. So that's one edge. And then we will need the same for the bottom. So I'm going to do one more with that. So that was 3 1/4 by 12.5. 3 1/4 by 12.5. And we'll get that. Trace that out. I'm just tracing these all first, and then we will cut them out. And then we're going to need, because by then we'll have, this will be 18 inches this way. So now we're going to need 3 1/4 by 18 inches. And the 18 inches is going to go along the selvage because we want to keep that going nice. So we're going to do, again, 3 1/4. So we're sticking with that. And then I need my other ruler to give me that extra. So this ruler here is 15 inches. So we are going to need 3 extra inches to get us to 18, because this is 15 plus 3 is 18. Sorry, I'm doing some math here, guys. Just want to get these pieces cut out correctly. So that'll give us 18 inches. What I like to do is get it all set up and then just double check that 1, 2, 3 1/4 I've got under there, and then from here I've got 15 plus 16, 17, 18. So that gives us the exact amount. Just like to double check before I actually do the cutting to make sure that my math is correct. And then I'm going to slide over and I will do another 3 1/4 by 18 for the other side. Just a really simple border on this pillow. You could do any kind of border you want to make it whatever size you want. I just think this 18-inch pillow is going to look really nice. And I have that other one I already made, and I think this will look nice paired with it because it's just different enough, but the same fabrics, the same pattern, just blown up. So it'll be fun to see them side by side when we're done. Those are our sides. We also are going to need an 18-inch, straight 18-inch back. So it'll be 18 by 18. So while I'm here, I might as well get that done, drawn out as well, so that we're just just cutting out all the same. So let's see. This is 18 inches, so just straight 18 inches here. And I'm just going off my previous markings here. The nice thing about Cuddle, we always say, is that it is just so forgiving. So now I can slide over there. So we need 3 inches plus this 15 inches. Remember to get our 18 inches. So however you get your 18 inches, that's what you want for a back of the pillow. We're going to do 18 inches. I'm doing a zipper pillow, not an envelope style, so it's super simple. We just do straight 18 by 18. 18 for the front, 18 for the back. Will work perfectly for our 18-inch pillows. And on this backing, I am just going to really quickly put in some markings for a knife edge. What that does is it makes our the knife edge takes those dog ears on the corner of pillows and it just sort of chops them down. So I like to do it, I think it looks a little bit nicer. Some people love the dog ears, so it's really up to you. I like the pillow to really stuff into those corners. So I'm just doing 5 inches from the edge and 1/2 inch from the edge and drawing a line. And when I go to sew this pillow, you'll see we'll use this edge here as the edge to begin the seam allowance to come away from it. So I'm just marking these in really quick. You could skip this part if you wanted to. I just think it looks nice. So I'm just doing the same thing all the way around. Now I don't cut these out. I still cut on the square, but I like to, because this fabric in there can kind of also just help fill up those dog ear corners. So I don't bother to cut along those lines, even though the seam allowance is going to be outside of those. So that's one thing to note. I'm not actually cutting on those lines. I'm just drawing them in so that I have them for when I go to sew. You could technically cut on those lines if you wanted to. I just think it's so much easier to hang on to the fabric with a luxe that's a little bit slippery if you keep those edges inside the pillow. Oops. A little bit there. And some people do different measurements. I've found that 1/2 inch and 5 inches works out pretty well for our Shannon Fabrics Dreamy Pillows. I think that fills them up really nicely with those measurements, those corners. So I like to do this tiny adjustment. And again, we've taken the time with that foundation piecing to make something really beautiful. So I don't like to rush through the rest of it. I still like to have something that looks beautiful. All right, so all of our pieces are now ready to cut out. We've got the 4 pieces for the border, and then we've got a backing of this pillow. So I'm going to get my knife. All right, so I have my knife, and I'm going to use this to cut these pieces out. Now remember, with the Quilting Cuddle, I did not bother using the SAC blade. I just used a rotary cutter. In fact, I told you I was using a dull rotary cutter because I use it to cut through that paper too, so I didn't want to dull my really nice one. You could also use the micro serrated scissors for this part. What we're trying to do is cut just the backing. We're trying not to cut too much of this nice pile off. So the blade works wonderfully for that. If you wanted to use the rotary cutter, you can. It's just going to make more mess and you'll have less of the nice pile in order to fluff up later. There is a seam allowance on this, so some of it will get eaten up into the seam allowance anyway. So it's really up to you what you use. I've just gotten pretty proficient with the blade, and so I like to use it when I'm cutting any luxe. We have lots of videos out in the Cuddle Studio that talk about cutting and the different methods of cutting, all the different types of cuddle. So you can always refer to those too if you are not sure what your favorite method might be. When I first started sewing with Cuddle and people were mentioning using the blade, I hadn't really ever done it, and so I was really nervous about it, and I felt like I wasn't very good at it. But it's really funny how quickly, once I committed to using it, it became like second nature. It really was a lot easier than I thought it would be. The learning curve was not too steep. The main thing is just to, remember you're not trying to push down super hard and cut through like the whole layers. You're just trying to cut through that back, and having a really nice sharp knife helps. So I'm going to vacuum these two pieces really quick because I want to shift things around, and I like to try to keep things neat when I sew. Typically when we're using the knife, it doesn't leave too much mess anyway. All right, so I am just checking these. On this one, I did say what the nap was, and so I want to make sure I have that consistent. So I am going to mark it on each of these. I hadn't done it before, so let me mark these. The nap is going this way. That way I don't have to go through this later again. I just know I have my naps going in the same direction. I'm using this water erasable marker. You might not be able to see it on camera, but I can see it from here. You could also use, because it's a hide, you could also use a felt tip Sharpie kind of marker. All right, so let me finish cutting these out. In the seam allowance. Yeah, I'm going to just clip the end of this blade. So you just get rid of that last one. Put it over here so I don't forget later. I don't like to just dump it in the trash because I don't want anyone to get hurt later. I usually use about 2 blades length. So we've got more real estate on that blade than we probably even really need. But as I'm, see how quickly that almost cut everything off too. Just once it's sharp, don't have to press nearly as hard. But when I'm, see, more of that came off there. See it? That's a sharp one. So I was probably pressing a little bit too hard here. But when I have 2 out, I can kind of cut along ways instead of pointing down. So I like to have more real estate for that blade to hit the backing. So that's why I like to have it out that far. But you'll figure out what works for you. There we go. That one wasn't as bad. You just got to adjust. So since we're done cutting, we should be done with the fluff and worrying about any kind of cuddle dust. And I like to get all that done ahead of time so we don't even have to think about it. Okay, so just really shake it all off. That way we know nothing is getting into this really nice Bernina machine here once we start to actually sew it together. Okay, so now we're going to be putting on those borders. So I marked which way the nap is going. So this one, the nap is going this direction. So the nap is going that way, the nap is going that way. So we want these 2 edges to go together. Now, I want the hide to be on the bottom because I want to sew from the top. I want to sew along this line. Now, this piece looks longer because it has pile hanging off of it. But what I want to do is get it nicely in place at both edges. We know it's the right length because we measured. So I'm just going to get it right in the right place on the edges, and then I can Yeah, see, then it falls into place nicely in between. So as usual with Luxe Cuddle, or with really most of our cuddles, we're going to pin the ends and then pin in the center and pin from there. I am pinning right on this 1/4 inch line because I am going to remove the pins as I go, and I don't want this hide to shift so much that I'm going to lose that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So typically with something like a hide, we are sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. But with this, we're going to use that 1/4 inch because we want to honor this, this pattern. But that way I can check the back and see, are my pins about where they should be? And they are. So shouldn't have any problem with it sliding within the seam allowance. So it should catch nicely. I'm going to put some pins here to do that double pinning that we like to do with hide or with any of our Luxe Cuddles. We haven't been doing too much double pinning with Quilting Cuddle, but we do some. So that should be good. Now I'm just going to stitch all the way across this, and we'll see how that goes. I am going to up my stitch length to 3.5. I've been using a 3 for the Quilting Cuddle during this foundation paper piecing because I wanted to have more stitching, especially along those diagonal lines. But now that we're over here and we're back to our traditional stitching with that hide in the back, I want to make sure I up it a little bit so that when anytime anything stretches later, we're not popping any stitches. We're still using, you know, the polyester thread and all of that, but that extra seam stitch length really helps with that. So here, that little piece of paper started to fold over. The fabric didn't, so we're okay on the fabric end, but that piece of paper started to fold over. So I'm just using the stiletto to kind of break through the paper and go back down. Continue stitching. As you go, you can kind of double check that the hide's in place, nothing is bunching up. As you go over these bulkier seams where these points are, you can use the stiletto to sort of hold everything in place. It is kind of fun to have this line that's showing you exactly where to go to get your perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance with the top. So let's clip that and let's go see how we did. I like to stop after each border edge so that we know that we've caught everything we need to catch. So, and look at that. It's hard to see with the hide hanging over, but if I use the stiletto, maybe you can see those points really nice up there. And the hide, you know, just kind of hangs out and hides them too, which is kind of funny, hide and hide. But if you were using something like a C3 for these edges that would show it more, or more Quilting Cuddle if you were doing a whole quilt with this, you would really see those crisp points at the 1/4 inch. So let's use our other piece that we're doing horizontally. Remember, I marked these. So now we have, this is coming down, the nap is coming down towards me. That arrow is pointing down. So we know if this is the right way, we want those two edges to go together. So we're going to do the same thing here, matching up the ends. And then matching in the center after we do this edge. Just letting everything fall into place where it naturally wants to go. And then putting a pin in. Lots of noises in the studio today. All right. Extra pin here. I don't often hold it up when I'm pinning like that first row, but because of that 1/4 inch there, it is a little tricky to get it just right. So I did sort of hold it as I was pinning there, and getting it through the paper is a little tricky too. So if you need to do that, it's totally fine. I usually say to keep it laying flat on the table so that nothing's distorted, but that helps just a little bit for us to get that right seam allowance. Let me put this down. All right. Here's my stiletto here. Stick this up in the pen. All right. Okay, let's take these out. Okay, so now we've got both edges there of the pillow. That's nicely done. We got everything was caught nicely in the seam allowance. Now, we are going to stitch that way. We're going to keep these in here because even though that's going to stitch over there, we still will have this available to pull out later. I like to just keep this paper on as long as I can. This is going to be a little bit trickier because for this, these ends do not have any paper stabilizing them, so nothing is stabilizing them. So now we're back to our standard, what we do with Sewing Luxe Cuddle. So we want the nap to go this way. My nap is pointing down this way. So I want this one to go here. And I still want this to be on the bottom and sew it like this. So we're going to do the same thing where we're just matching up these edges and then matching up this edge here. But then because the stableness of the paper, I am going to kind of press that down and figure out where it wants to be in the middle. Just make sure everything's kind of peeking out. And I will put a pin toward the middle, but then I'm going to lock this in place here just as soon as I can. I want to make sure this corner is nicely locked in place. Just want to make sure that we didn't press these corners at all. We didn't press after putting the luxe there because we typically don't press when we're working with something like a luxe. You certainly could if you wanted to, just use your pressing cloth. But I want to make sure that corner is going to be nice because I want the frame of this border to be crisp in the corners. The theme of this is crisp. I like all those nice points to be super crispy, as I've said. So I don't want to just add a silly border that isn't the same quality. All right, so then the part that is going to be stitched over the paper, that'll be nice and secure anyway. We know that that's going to get locked in place nicely. But again, we do definitely need to double pin on this outside edge because that fabric is all luxe there. And so we will get some sliding if we don't lock it all in nicely, including this seam right there. So we do want to make sure we've got that nicely snug too. Just we don't want anything shifting around. And I have my hand under there again because with the thickness of the paper, I wanted to make sure that nothing was bunching underneath. So you see everything's nice and smooth. So we should have good success. Let's come back over. And now we are doing 1/4 of an inch. Obviously this part doesn't have a line for me to follow. So it's a little bit trickier, but I'm still going to try to just aim for the 1/4 inch that we know is already there. Plus I know this foot, where 1/4 of an inch is on the foot. I've been familiar with it. So you can kind of see right here is where we're aiming. And you're just taking the pins out as you go. You're using them as long as you can to keep it stabilized. And then once you're on the paper, now we know where our 1/4 inch is. Let's get some nice seam there. And then pretty soon here we're coming down to just off of that paper again. So now we've got to just know where our 1/4 inch is according to our foot and use the stiletto to help lock everything in place. Now let's take these pins out and see how everything went. See if we caught everything in the stitching. Yep, there we go. That's a little bit more than a 1/4 inch, but it's okay. The whole thing's going to turn out really nice. We have a nice square edge there and a nice square edge there. And this is forgiving. Again, the hide has some stretch, so we'll have some forgiveness in there that we got a little more in that seam allowance. So that's totally okay. Now we're going to do our final strip here. See, it says it's going down, so that's the right way there. Oh, doesn't that look so pretty with the jade? I think it's going to look so nice. And we're just doing the same thing we did on the other side, matching everything up, really taking care at the corners. Feeling underneath so I can feel where the edge of the hide is, because there's that pile that's hanging over, so it's deceiving. I want to make sure I'm actually catching the backing fabric and not just the pile there, because then it will slip and we will not get a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I think we're good there. So that's the other reason I'm kind of pulling from the back there. That's in place. Now I can pin again through the paper. Just trying to keep this one seam, that's a bulky seam there, so I want to keep that nice. Over here I want to get this, the corner of this in really nicely there. Any slipping. As you can see, I keep lifting it up and flattening it because you want to see where that fabric wants to go. You're letting the fabric tell you where it wants to go, and then you're directing it in the direction you want it to go. So you don't want to fight the fabric, you want to be in control over it, but sometimes you have to kind of feel what's it wanting to do right here, what's it trying to do, and how can I prevent that from happening. Down. All right, put one more in there. Okay. Let's do this final border edge. Nice and firm in there. Let's get going with this 1/4 inch seam allowance. I do have a little more than a 1/4 inch right now, so I'm just trying to blend it into the 1/4 inch so we can see what that looks like when I'm done. If we're not happy with it, we can always take out some stitches, but I think we're pretty close. myself again. Those pins. Go. I'll lift the foot up because the paper is bunching. I want to make sure the fabric's not bunching and it's just the paper. Yep, it is indeed just the paper. So I just want to make sure. As I mentioned before, the paper at this point has been folded so many times. It's desperate to come undone. So I just want to make sure that it's just the paper and not actually bunching in the fabric. Okay. Let's see if we got that seam allowance okay under there. I do think we've got more seam allowance on that corner than we needed, but I still think it's going to be okay. So yeah, nice 1/4 inch there, and that's a little more, but again, it's all going to come out nicely in the end. Great. So look at how beautiful that looks. I think that's just so elegant. I think this is going to be a really nice throw pillow. I think it's going to complement our other ones so well. And now we're just going to put this together. So this is our standard zipper pillow, not super complicated. I'm going to attach the zipper to this bottom edge here. Again, we have the nap there. We know which way it's going. This is an invisible zipper. We have tutorials in the Cuddle Studio that talk about making a pillow out on YouTube as well. So we, if you're not sure how to do a knife edge zipper pillow, you can certainly look that up. I'm just going to add it pretty quickly here. So I'm not going to go into super detail about it, but we're just going to unzip it a bit. And then wrong side down. Put wrong side down here. I often will use the wash away Wonder Tape stabilizer. I'm not going to use that here because it's not super necessary. This zipper doesn't have to go in an exact spot because it is going to sort of be adjusted. It's shorter than the pillow itself, so it doesn't matter where it is because I'm within the bounds, if that makes sense. And with the outside edges of the pillow, so now that we're done with the actual foundation paper piecing and this Quilting Cuddle section of the project, we're now going to start using our traditional 1/2 inch seam allowance like we normally would with our cuddles. So keep that in mind as you're making a pillow, is that that seam allowance is going to be 1/2 inch. So again, with this zipper, I'm not too worried about getting it exactly at 1/2 inch. But I do want to make sure I'm actually grabbing the fabric. So let's just make sure that was a little bit too on the edge. There we go. So, and this is an invisible zipper, so it does sort of just climb into the fabric itself. Like you won't, I mean, any zipper ends up being pretty invisible when you're using some of the luxes. But for this one, you could use an invisible zipper foot to get super close in there. I am not going to bother with that today because I know that the hide's going to hide it as well. Hide will hide it. That's funny. But you certainly could use a zipper foot or an invisible zipper foot to get super close in there. Now I'm going to just lift the presser foot and see if I can get this moved past. There we go. That worked well. Sometimes if you're a little closer, it can be tricky. I just want to make sure this hide on this side here doesn't get caught in the stitching, although we could certainly fluff that up later. And as we put these together, I can always come along and make this seam allowance smaller really easily. So I'm not worried too much right now of making sure that this zipper will be invisible. So I'm just trying to get it in place. Once it's in place, again, I can go over it later. So if we just get it in place, then we know the zipper's going to work. It's also at the bottom of the pillow, so I'm not as concerned about it showing. That's another thing to keep in mind. All right, so now I'm going to close this zipper up, and I am just going to attach that zipper to the bottom of this 18-inch piece we have over here. So remember, I put a marking on there. It's very faint right now. You can't see it very well, but the arrow goes this way. So that's saying that the nap is going down. So this nap goes this way, this goes this way, so this goes on top of this just like that. So what I'm concerned about here is I want to line up the hide on the outside here with the hide. I'm not worrying about the zipper yet, just worrying about the hide, the fabric, to get it to line up. Now I'm going to stitch from the tops, the backing, because I want to make sure that we do those little knife edges we talked about before. Since we took the time to put them in, I want to utilize them. So I'm just going to try to grab the first part of this zipper. And I'm just trying to grab the zipper, the one side of the zipper there, just that zipper tape. So I've got that zipper caught there, and then I'm going to catch the other end of the zipper. Just so I have that in place. Now I can go along and pin the hide to the zipper itself. Because once we get down to where this knife edge starts, we're going to sort of be coming in on the zipper itself, so it's not going to make it all the way around. Just kind of moving that. Again, we do have videos on doing the zipper part if any of this sounds confusing or daunting. It's really not hard to put a zipper in. And the fabric is, again, just so forgiving. So I'm going to, another one there. Now I am going to kind of flatten this out and then put some double pinning in there. And I'm only going to do this edge so far. I want to just get this edge done so that we have the zipper installed and we know what we're working with. And then we can work on the rest. There we go. Okay, so let's get, oops, actually, I do want that to be flat. There, so we'll start there. And remember, we put those initial pins in, so let's get those pins that we put on the other side transferred to the outside. Don't see any others. All right, so let's get this bottom edge with the zipper done. So at first, we're stitching through the hides, the 2 layers of hide here, and then that zipper is going to be in between. Oops, actually. And remember, we're using that knife edge there as the seam allowance, as not the seam edge, the edge of the fabric. So we're going to go 1/2 inch away from that. So that can be tricky to remember. And we're going to, you can't really see that line there because of my pins, but we are going to switch there. And now we are going to cross over the zipper because, so I've got the zipper backed like that, because we need to kind of catch that zipper there. And now I'm going to raise the presser foot and I'm going to try to pull this part out so we're just working with this way, sorry, this way is what I want to do. So we're crossing over, and then we're just going to be working with that side of the zipper and the hide. Here is where we're going to cross over the zipper. Now we've made it down to the edge. And we may have to go through and look at what's going on with the zipper and make any adjustments. Always pull some stitches if we need to. The hide does want to climb over, so you can feel the zipper with the stiletto there. We might have gone over the teeth there, so we might need to go back there and clip that. We'll figure it out in the next step. The key is not to be too afraid of it because we can always make adjustments. Normally, you would probably put the zipper on this side before trying to put the layers together. Let's lift this up so I can unzip a little bit. Get in there and unzip this zipper. So I don't want to hit. Oh, actually, I'm not going to hit it. Good. Maybe without. So that's the head of the zipper there. And as long as I can reach in and open it, here, I'm going to cut there, open the zipper, and then I'll come back to that point. I want to be able to open this zipper later, so there's going to be like a little garage for it to go in, and I just want to make sure it's outside of that garage. But I don't want these fabrics to separate there because it does need to, it's sort of hard to explain. Put this pin in there. In order to create the garage, we have to pass over that zipper. So remember, right here, we're still using just the zipper and the hide. But then we want to, over here, start going over both. Set that up. We're going to kind of cross over the teeth. And you do stitch over the zipper teeth there, but that's what we're supposed to do. Now I'm following that knife edge over here. And normally you would probably continue all the way around, but I am just stopping there so we can check all the zipper stuff, make any adjustments we have to make, and then we can go the rest of the way around. So let's just see, what kind of situation do we have here? Let's get all these pins out. We're going to check that. That looks pretty good there. As you can see, it kind of looks hidden zipper already, even though we didn't officially make it an invisible zipper. You want to make sure the zipper is going to work. So will it open and close? So it does, it opens and closes. It's a small opening. Let's see. But those pillows do go in pretty nicely there. Let me see here. Should I? That's okay. I still think it's going to work pretty nicely. So that's going to be our zipper there, and we will stuff that pillow inside there, and we can undo it. Once we unzip it, we can then wash the pillow. So I think that's going to look nice, and I'm not going to make any changes there. I haven't taken the paper out yet. I want to keep this stable for now. We will take this paper out again before we wash, before we're done. We will take the paper out. But for now, I want to just kind of keep that paper inside. All right, so now we are going to pin around the rest of the edges. I'm going to make sure the pillowcase is open so we can turn it through the pillowcase when we're done. So make sure that's open. And now we're just going to pin all the way around. Almost done with this project. And this at this point is just hide to hide. So it's the same way we would do any of our Luxe Cuddles, using our double pinning. Get all these pins in there, keep it flat. This. Match up our corners. Let it sit where it wants to sit. And again, I like to have these border seams pressed away from the paper piecing. So I'm just sort of doing it with my fingers as we go here and putting the pin in. Because it's luxe, you're not going to super feel that when it's done. So if it doesn't stay exactly pressed out, that's not really a problem. I just like to at least start with it being pressed away. Fussy here. The nice thing about those dreamy pillows is that, or the dream pillows, they're really nicely stuffed, so we'll get a beautiful puffed up stuffing from that pillow. Okay, almost done with all of our double pinning here. And before we start to stitch, I will just double check on the other side that we don't have anything bunching up too much or anything like that. So everything looks good over here. I want to make sure that it's trying to pin out, at least point out. I like to see those going out. See those there on that edge. I didn't pay attention to that, so they are pointing in, but that's okay. That's within the zipper area, so it's not going to be noticed. All right, so let's get stitching around the rest of this pillow. Once again, we're following our knife edge markings that we did on the pillow. If we feel anything starting to bunch, we can lift the presser foot, work our way around. Use the stiletto a lot here just to help guide. There's that other knife edge spot that we're going to start turning in. There. Okay, so that's about where we've stopped there. One more. There we go. I'll lift the presser foot and then turn. I'm going to use that knife edge there. So we've still got a corner. It's just a softer corner. So we're not going around, we're not making like a rounded edge there, we're just making a softer corner. So we're still stopping, like about more, from not the edge, but from the knife edge marking when we turn. You could certainly go off each edge instead of turning like that. I like to just turn because then the corners are loose to sort of do what they want inside the pillow. And there's not extra stitching in there, kind of throwing anything off. All right, we're almost coming back to our zipper here. We're not going to cross over the zipper again because we are just going to do this knife edge here. I'm going to backstitch. I haven't been backstitching a lot because I've been securing it with a knot and clipping the threads, but I am just going to backstitch there. Let's get this undone, and then we will see how the pillow fits inside. All right. So everything looks good. So I'm going to keep the paper in for now. I'm actually going to show you really quick how we would remove the paper. So I like to use the stiletto to kind of get underneath, and we're not ripping out any stitching. We are really just ripping out the perforations around it, and it really just pulls away. Any of the spots that have the glue on them will pull right up, so you don't have to worry about that. That 505 glue pulls right up, no problem, and it will wash right out. So you just use those perforations to sort of peel the paper away. And that reveals the quilting cuddle underneath, the backing there. And you could always press the seam allowances once you've got all the paper off if you want to. I like to keep the paper on through doing the extra steps here because it really does give us an easy way to see that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to take that one little corner off. All this paper just gets thrown right away. But it'll be a little bit crispy inside this pillow when we're doing it right now, but that way I don't want to take the time now to take all that paper off for you. Just sort of pushing out the corners. You could use a point turner if you wanted to. I find that just putting your finger in the corner, pushing it out, does a pretty good job on its own. So let's just fluff this up. Oh, that looks so pretty, doesn't it? So now let's see if we can fit the pillow inside. So this is one of the Shannon Dreamy pillows. This was one of the earlier ones, so it is a little bit overstuffed from what they are now, so it might be a little tricky getting it in, so let's see how we can do. They are really, really nicely stuffed, but this one is just one of the original early versions that we have here in the studio, so it's a little tougher, but I just kind of go around the edges, and I'm pushing the filling inside as I go to just really get it fluffed up. To me, it's worth the extra effort here to have a really luscious stuffed pillow in the end. So we're just kind of pushing it through. The fabric underneath the table is sort of sliding as I push. So you're seeing everything slide a little bit, but that's totally fine. Let's get this in there. And you could make that zipper opening bigger. I didn't bother to make it much bigger because that's the size zipper I had. And I know it'll work. And this will still work great for taking the pillow out to wash the pillowcase. But most of the time it's going to be inside the pillow once you get it in there. So now I'm just going to pull those ends to where they should be. Where's that end there? The corners. So we pull the corners to where they should go. I can hear the paper in there crinkling, which is funny. And just sort of pushing it all into place. So it'll all fit in really nicely in the end. Let's see, almost there. And you can just kind of shake your pillow out till it gets in the right place. Again, these are a little bit overstuffed, so you shouldn't have so much trouble getting yours in, but we got it. Let me show you. So we have that non-invisible, invisible zipper because I didn't bother getting too close to the edge there, but if we fluff up that hide a little bit more, it'll hide it a little bit. We are pretty puffy there, but you can see our nice little pillow. I can hear the crinkle of the paper in there. We will take that out eventually, but these corners are nice. They stick up, but they're not flopping over. They're just a really nice shape to them that I like. And once you've used this a little bit and all the filling kind of gets pushed into place, it'll be just perfect. So I want to show you with the other one side by side. I think they look really nice together. Remember, this is the 6-inch square that has been used, rotated around 4 quadrants to make a 12-inch piece. And this is just the 12-inch on its own. And I think there's so many uses for these. We could use them for like a quillo. So you could put it right at the pillow part of the quillo, and then you'd have your throw inside. You can use it for a whole quilt. There's lots of ways you can use this foundation paper piecing. And we're hoping to have some more foundation paper piecing patterns that come out for Shannon. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd love you to go check out the rest of our videos over on the Cuddle Studio.